Good evening, and welcome to another presentation from Northumberland Learning Connection. Greetings to both our returning participants and those joining us for the first time. My name is Joanne O'Sullivan, and I'm a member of the Board of Directors of the Northumberland Learning Connection. I'm also a member of the Program Committee, and a year ago, as the Program Committee was working on long-term care, researching, I came across the research and publications of Pat Armstrong. Her work stood out to me for its empathetic approach to being a resident. Acknowledging concern for finance and staffing issues, Pat Armstrong still found space to speak of the personal lived experience, including the significance of quality food and laundry service. Meals are often the social highlight of the day and an important aspect of maintaining health. If the food is appetizing, tasty, and varied, residents benefit. So too the need to be able to choose your favorite clothing, which can affirm your sense of identity. If laundry services are lacking, then you can be sure your choices will be limited. On April 26th, in 2020, Michael Enright interviewed Pat Armstrong on CBC's The Sunday Edition. This encounter just affirmed for me how important she is in the field of long-term care. Some viewers this evening will probably have some sort of experience directly or indirectly with long-term care homes. My own mother spent many years in retirement residence here in Northumberland County. Also joining us this evening is Hugh Armstrong, who has both the same interest and knowledge, or similar interest and knowledge in long-term care. Now I'm pleased to introduce our moderator for the evening, Karen Wells, an award-winning journalist, CBC personality, lawyer, and author. Over to you, Karen.
Thank you very much, Joanne. Much appreciated, and welcome to everybody out there tonight. Joanne said, as she said, that tonight is all about getting old, where we're going to live as we age, and how we're going to live well, thriving and not just surviving. It's a subject increasingly on people's minds with the wave of deaths during the first wave of COVID, and now most recently 2 reports, scathing reports on the inadequacy of the conditions in long-term care homes. Now, recently, what we've also seen is the media weighing in and many healthcare providers on issues around alternate ways of living. Does it have to be long-term care? And I think we will touch on that to some degree as well. So there's lots to talk about. Before I introduce our guest tonight, let me go through some housekeeping details. Conversation with Pat and Hugh Armstrong will go till 8:10, 8:15. Then we will go to questions from you, from the audience. I would ask, and I promise I'll put as many questions as I can, could you keep them brief? Could you keep them short? It helps me read them off the screen and keep them focused, if you will. And if you don't want me to use your name, just say anonymous. That should do it. Now, let me formally introduce Pat and Hugh Armstrong. They have been working in this and related areas, health, women's work, long-term care for, I would say, pretty well their entire careers in one way or another. I must confess, I met them both more than 50 years ago when they were, for want of a better word, student activists, committed then to social justice, and it's a commitment that has never left. It is just the articulation has taken different forms. Very respected people in their field. Pat Armstrong is the principal investigator in that 10-year study, a massive undertaking. She has been chair of the Department of Sociology at York University and director of the School of Canadian Studies at Carleton. And she was chair of Health Canada's Women and Health Care Reform for over a decade. Hugh Armstrong is a distinguished research professor emeritus of social work and political economy at Carleton. It's a combination you don't see very often. He has done work in the area of political economy, of healthcare, of unions, on public policy, and has done a lot of work on women. If you go way back, his PhD thesis was on working class women in the Canadian labor force. So it's a commitment long held. He's worked and taught at universities in Canada, in the UK, Australia, and Germany. So, Pat and Hugh Armstrong, are you there? Thank you for joining us tonight. There they are. Good.
We are
Much
here.
appreciated.
Thank
Good
you.
to see you. And you're joining us from Toronto, right?
We are
We
indeed.
are indeed.
Good, good. All right. I mentioned that, I mean, obviously this was a massive study. It was very much an on-the-ground study. Can you just briefly outline where you went and the kind of people you were speaking to?
Well, I'll start. We went to 6 different countries, as your slide said. Norway, Sweden, Germany, the UK, the US, and Canada, in part because we wanted to be in countries that had different kinds of politics and approaches. So social democratic countries, of course, Norway and Sweden, the UK being closer to Canada and the US, but of course, Canada and the US being closest, and Germany having a quite different system from the others, allowed us to explore those systems. So we did 2 kinds of methods. One we called analytical mapping, which is basically to figure out what care looked like in these different countries and how they were organized and structured, and try and analyze that. The other part of it was what we called rapid site switching ethnographies. And we would take, it's easy, it sounds complicated, it was quite simple. We would take a team of 12 or 14 people into a nursing home over the course of a week. And we would work in teams and in shifts, and we would interview and observe. And when you weren't on your team and on your shift, we would get together and talk about what we thought we saw and heard, correcting, challenging, debating with each other, because we certainly had different and complicated responses. All of these teams were international, and all of them were interdisciplinary. We had 4 physicians on the team, several nurses, people from social work, a philosopher, an architect, an economist, historians. We had a bit of everything.
Wow. It's an impressive undertaking in and of itself. I want to go back because there's a book that came out under your names about 10 years ago, and it looked at long-term care in Canada and Scandinavia. And I think the title seems to say it all. The title was They Deserve Better. What was, I mean, that suggests a certain attitude. Tell me where that came from and what your thinking was going into all this.
That book was based on a survey that we undertook. We did the Canadian part. Our Swedish colleague organized the Nordic part. It included Finland as well as Norway and Sweden and Denmark. And basically what we found was that conditions weren't great anywhere, but they were particularly bad in Canada. We did 3 Canadian provinces for that one. And one of the most striking thing we found was that the workers, the personal support workers, or PSWs as we call them here, and the equivalent in the Nordic countries, we asked them about their experiences with violence. How often did they experience violence? In the Canadian case, it was almost every day for the workers, about 6 times higher than was the situation in the Nordic countries.
6 times.
Sorry?
6 times.
6 times, yes.
Wow.
And the populations of the characteristics of the residents were very similar. So it wasn't that the residents were much younger, healthier, so on in the Nordic countries. They're very similar, as were the ages. So something was going on. And we thought that it had to do in part with the staffing levels and the associated frustration for both workers and residents when there isn't enough staffing. And with autonomy, the workers in the Nordic countries were much more able to decide for themselves what to do, when, with whom, including sitting down and having a chat with somebody. And it had to do with training. They were much better trained in the Nordic countries, although their starting position was the same. And in fact, in at least one country, their training started in high school. So it wasn't as if they had a lot of postgraduate education, but they had continuous learning, much like your Northumberland learning connection.
Okay.
They also had a lot of teamwork, closely teamwork, and no contracting out of services. Although there was one really interesting result in this survey, and that is that the Canadians were more likely to say that they took residents for a walk than was the case in the Nordic countries. And we found that very surprising. And then when we dug deeper in interviews, we discovered that when they were answering that question in the Nordic countries, they literally meant out for a walk. Like, did you take the resident out, for a stroll outside the facility? And they said that they didn't do that as often as the Canadians. For the Canadians, they were talking about, did they walk them to the dining room?
So it sort of underlined the need to specify in your question. Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, and to how they just conceived of the whole thing differently, to go back to your question about the title, that they do deserve better. And one of the things that we've learned in the most recent study, actually, that we're doing with the Nordic countries, that we're calling unpaid work in public places, it is that there's no expectation at all that families provide care. And to go back to where you started about the COVID and the extent to which families were barred, and we realized, or at least we realized, it became evident in the media that how much work of daily care was provided by families. So that doesn't happen in Sweden, or at least it didn't when we were doing our research.
I spent some time in long-term care homes and in day programs in Denmark, which of course is held up as this great example. And indeed, a care worker there said if she experienced violence in a day, she thought that she had done something wrong, which was reflective. And they would also go for 10-kilometer bike rides in a day. I mean, these were obviously people who were not terribly ill. But this study focused on long-term care. What about aging in place, which the Danes do a lot? Is that something we should be looking at more? Is there stuff to be done there, more to be done there?
Yes, well, we moved, as I think you might have mentioned at the beginning, we studied hospitals first. And we did that in part because we've been looking at women's work, and then our daughter broke her leg. And we were in the hospital, and especially when they asked me, her mother, to bring her juice and make sure she had a bedpan and things, not her father. We realized that such a microcosm of all of women's paid and unpaid work is in this one place. And that started us on a journey to study healthcare. We started with hospitals. We moved from hospitals to home care. And of course, this is women's work too, only it's mostly unpaid, mostly provided by family of women without a formal training, but with an awful lot of work. And we certainly have written about the extent to which we need home care and we need supports for home care, but not everybody has a home. And, as the feminist movement said long ago, not every home is a haven in a heartless world. We have to remember that their homes can be filled with abuse and they can be lonely. There's no question that we need to have better home care and more support for care at home. But also, as the Commission has said, we're still going to need long-term care. We just need to make it good. And let me say one more thing before I stop on answering that question is we interview residents. We interviewed a residents council not long ago and said, and it wasn't one of the greatest homes we were in, I must say, is there anything better about being here than being at home? And they unanimously said yes. They said, first of all, I feel safe. Now that might feel a little odd during COVID, but one example that was given us was a woman said she'd had a stroke. She couldn't remember to take her insulin. Now they made sure that she got her insulin, and that made her feel safe. They said, we have activities. I know people think we sit all day in front of the TV, but if I was at home, that's the only thing I'd ever do. And the third thing they said is we have company. When I'm at home, I'm all alone.
Let me just add something, which is that we have also spoken to women who say, because they're looking after very frail, needy relatives, that they are under house arrest. They can't leave because the individual they're looking after needs 24-hour, 7-day-a-week care. And it is some jurisdictions have now introduced minor respite care so that you can get away briefly. We have a friend who lives in Saskatchewan who has somebody come in 4 hours a week, and he uses a couple of those hours to get the weekly groceries. He's got to get his hair cut once in a while, other stuff he's got to do, but the main thing he has to do is to get the groceries because his partner is very needy.
Well, the COVID means he doesn't have to get his hair cut anyway.
Yeah, well, just look at me.
Yeah. And I did see numbers in one of those reports recently that said, being realistic, only 1 in 9 people in long-term care homes could have their care provided at home. That most people are over 85, a majority suffer from dementia. Long-term care homes are a reality. So then is it a matter of making them better? Just
exactly.
Yeah. Can we go through some of the specifics? Because you broke things down in terms of the physical environment, food, etc. Can you talk a little bit about the physical structures and how those differ from place to place? Who does it best?
In the introduction, the laundry was mentioned. If you have a room that has a locker-sized place for your clothes, you don't have many clothes options. If you have a physical space where the clothes are all boiled,
yeah,
you know what you're limited to in terms of what you can wear. And that very fact of the size of your closet and where the clothes are washed has a tremendous impact on your sense of dignity. Your clothes are the last sort of piece of identity in yourself that you bring with you and that the world sees when you go to eat dinner or whatever. And just trying to figure out about laundry. We were in a home in Sweden where every room has its own private bathroom. And in each bathroom was one of those small European washer dryer combo things, and so when the care aide came in the morning, she could throw the personal laundry into the into that washing machine and hang it up if it was, mom's favorite sweater. We heard a lot about mom's favorite sweater, I must say, wherever we went. But also they could do the same with the linens, and so you weren't spreading infection around. You didn't have to boil the stuff in the same way because it wasn't going out of the room. So it did both things. It'll let you have your choice of clothes and reduced inspections.
Another physical structures issue concerns food.
Yep.
If on your unit, there is the capacity to prepare some or most of the food and have the aromas waft over the rest of the area, that encourages appetite. Nutrition is very important, as we know, and we've really heard about that during COVID, but we knew it before. But if you've got the capacity on site to prepare food as it's needed, so that not everybody is marched to the dining room for 8 o'clock because that's when the food's going to come in and it's going to leave at 8:45. If some people, as I've experienced in European countries, sort of wander in between 7 and 10 or so, and one of the workers can help them prepare their breakfast and knows what they want, this is just a much better way of living. It's better for the resident, it's better for the worker, it's cheaper, you don't waste as much food, and of course it's a great deal more nutritious. So, but the trouble is that once you take the kitchen facilities out of the building, it's very expensive to bring them back in.
Right, if you contract out the food.
And if you contract out the food, it's, it comes in as plastic on plastic.
It's also location is really important. Where the home is located, not just in terms of the relationship to your community and that you have a parking lot, but we heard over and over again from residents, we don't want to be put out to pasture.
Literally.
Yeah.
In some big empty field. Yeah.
Exactly. It's nothing more boring than watching the grass grow, they said. They wanted to see people. And we were in one home that one side of it, this is a home in Canada, had a beautiful stream, and the staff put out scraps to attract animals. A deer came along, and it's true, residents occasionally looked there, but they mainly went to the other side that was the parking lot and the shopping center, because there were people.
That was life.
Yeah.
Yeah. In one of the Danish homes I visited, it was actually a day program. There was most all of those people attending the day program had dementia to some degree or other. And there was a woman there, they were all making lunch. And what they were going to make for lunch, they determined to begin with. And one woman said to the woman in charge, "How do you want the tomatoes cut?" And she was wielding the knife. There was no question. And the woman in charge simply said, "Any way you want. It's just a salad. It doesn't matter." But the notion that people are holding knives when they might be somewhat into dementia, it doesn't tend to happen in Canada, does it?
No.
The first time I went into a German home, the first thing I saw was an elderly woman wielding a sharp knife, and she was preparing vegetables for dinner. And that's not only that she was active and involved, this was her home. The unit I was in was a unit with mild to moderate dementia, but there was no thought of anybody leaving. Why leave home? If you're stuck in a prison, whether it's a large or a small prison, the first thing you want to do is escape.
Right. Yeah.
Well, and it raises this whole question of safety versus risk. Life with no risk is just boring. So if falls are counted as something terrible against the place, and you don't have very much staff, the safest thing you can do is stick everybody in a wheelchair, rather than, take the time to walk with them. And we heard so many people say, "My mother walked in here, they put her in a wheelchair, and within weeks she couldn't walk." But their fall rate is low because they're safe.
And she becomes incontinent and then develops a urinary tract infection. So it's in fact riskier to put them in a wheelchair.
Hugh, you wrote the chapter on risk versus safety. I wonder what you have to add to that. I mean, how much risk should an aging person take? Is it time to go skydiving?
Well, I think George Bush the first did go skydiving in his 80s,
Yeah.
but I don't recommend it. I'm not going to do it. But then my knees have been replaced, and so there are a lot of things I don't do. But yes, it is a tricky balance, always, and it's not a balance that you can decree from on high. It has to be done by the people in the place, the residents themselves, the staff, the management, the visitors, the family and friends who visit. They all have to be involved in working it out, and they might work it out in different ways. We were in a home in Canada where somebody who had a resident who had trouble swallowing said what he really wanted was a good steak. And they talked about this, worked it out, got him to sign something to say, if he did die as a result, they were not
They wouldn't
to
sue
be
him.
held responsible. And he had a great steak, and he did choke on it, and he did die, and everybody was happy.
Well,
Wow.
No, the family was happy because he had lived a good life. It wasn't it wasn't medically assisted assistance in dying, but it was a calculation of risk by the people involved. Now that's an extreme case, and I don't recommend it. But on the other hand, I can appreciate it.
And
Well,
it's also an enlightened family.
Yes. Oh, yes. That's true.
That's the other thing I was going to say. Another of those small books is on negotiating tensions. And sometimes the tension is between the family and the staff when it's the family that says, I don't want risk, and I certainly don't want my mother thinking about sex. That there are often, we've certainly encountered that question in various homes. So when you say risk, you don't want the extremes of the sort that Hugh was talking about aren't the usual kinds of choices, but whether or not it's risky to a large extent also depends on how much staff you have and how much time they have
Right.
to take the time. So it's not so risky to go for a walk when there's someone with you. And so you can understand why people are put in wheelchairs because they simply don't have the time to take people for a walk.
In that same Danish place that I keep referring to, they were very busily making snaps. They made snaps all the time. It's a drink in Denmark. They made their own, and there was snaps with every meal. Sex, drugs, rock and roll is a difficult thing to accommodate in a long-term care home. In this country, at least.
We ran a workshop for RNs here in Ontario, actually, that we called Sex, Drugs, and Rock and Roll. And it is the case that very few places want to even think about the possibility of sex and the rock and roll too is very much related to what kind of music you get. Like we were in one home where the favorite music was Black Sabbath, not Good Night, Irene, which seems to be thought of here in Canada, but alcohol in Scandinavia was much more common. They had a drinks cart that would go around at night. Although veterans' homes in Canada have alcohol.
Yeah.
And
One
they
of
have,
the
and they
things
have
that,
good pubs, and
Right.
and it's a regular event, and the veterans put on their good blazer, perhaps with some medals on it, and they go down and have a couple of beers at night. We were in homes in Britain where there was a fridge with a clear glass door, small fridge, and in it was beer. And any resident, any visitor could come and help themselves to have a beer. It was relatively low alcohol beer, but it was beer. I experienced the same in Germany.
logically enough, where there's very good beer. Why do Canadian long-term care homes have such difficulty accommodating so many of the things that you're talking about? Is it all attitude or what?
Well, first of all, I think that there are some quite good homes in Canada,
Yeah.
and we've certainly been in some. We've certainly been in some that allow alcohol. We've been in some that cook their own food. We've seen some that have real closets, you know, so part of it, yes, is attitude. Part of it's money. Part of it here, I think, is ageism, especially when most of them are older women who are the least valued, I think, in terms of age categories. So I think it's a combination of factors, and there's no question we've just been, we don't want to think about growing old, and so we don't want to think about older people. And like so many of our friends say, I'm not going into a place like that. But you know, we rarely met anyone who planned to go into a long-term care home.
But they ended up there.
Absolutely.
And
So
they needed to in almost every case.
we used to say, would you send your mother to one of these homes? And now we say, would you go into one of these homes? Is this where you'd like to be? Because that's what we have to convince Canadians. What is the place that you would like to be in? And then let's work for it.
And you've got two alternative ways of getting in. One is to have lots of money and therefore a luxurious facility with lots of staff. That's the US model. And the others who don't have that lot of money don't get in. The other alternative is to have the public sector provide decent funding, which you don't find in Canada anywhere. We have some cases where the municipality or the charitable organization that owns and operates the home supplements what government provides. But if they don't, well, then it's probably not going to be a very good place. A few of them have very outstanding leaders, and therefore they make it as good as they can. But what we need is a lot more money to provide a lot more well-paid, well-trained staff, and then figure out how to make them more home-like. They aren't homes, they're congregate places to live. They're not your home, but we can make them more humane with some more money and with some more better ideas of the sort that we identified in our travels over the last decade or so.
One of the biggest elements that you identify as a determining factor is ownership. Who owns the facility? Why does that make a difference, and what have you seen?
Well, it makes a difference because money has to go to profit rather than care. That's the short answer.
If they all get the same amount of money and you have to take some out as profit, well, then you have less money for care. All of them are underfunded. Particularly underfunded are the ones that are for profit.
The phrase I've seen is pursuit of dividends rather than pursuit of mission. Which seemed fairly succinct way of putting it. I mean, it's all very well to write a magnificent, massive report. How does anything in here get realized? And has COVID actually perversely presented a good opportunity to discuss?
Yes, COVID has, as you say, perversely done that. It is quite interesting to read all these reports and think, oh yeah, we said that, and not only us, right, but many reports, as the Royal Society report documents, there have been 100 or so of these sorts of studies. They're very, very common in their conclusions that staffing is absolutely central, but staffing alone doesn't do it. You have to have the conditions including the physical plant, as you were talking about before. And you have to have the motive be care, not profit. So you need quite a few things, but you know, there have been some places that have been trying hard, and we think that our study, as well as many other studies, have had some impact. We've had some impact on some physical planning of places. We've had some impact on staffing, and the study we did for the City of Toronto was one of the factors in them moving to 4 hours of care before the province decided that they would do it eventually. So I think this kind of research and the many other kinds of research done in this area have had an impact. It's just that I think that we have a point now where maybe we'll make a much bigger change rather than these small incremental steps that we've been making so far.
Simply because we're so much more aware because of the COVID situation. Yeah.
So we should take advantage of the crisis. But it's also, and I'll go back to when we got Medicare. We got it because the public demanded it. It wasn't something, it wasn't a bright idea among some civil servants. It wasn't a mission among some politicians. They were dragged to it by a coalition of church groups and community groups and unions and public health folks. It happened because of popular pressure. And I think the popular pressure now is rising. We're very concerned that it will dissipate quickly now that people aren't dying all the time in long-term care. But we've got to keep the pressure up, and that's why we're delighted to have the opportunity to talk to the people in your connection.
Well, and Medicare arose again from a crisis. I mean, it really came out of the Depression, didn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, it took a while to come to fruition.
That and the war showing what poor shape so many men were in.
And some good stories like Tommy Douglas's broken leg. You know, it took some particular events, but and the events now are the 80% of the deaths in the first wave of COVID were in long-term care. So, you know, there's some particular things you can hang your advocacy on, but it takes an enormous amount of continuing advocacy over years, if not decades.
Does it help that the baby boomers are thundering down the track and there's so many of us? No, yeah.
No, I think so, because after all, we are the generation that demanded healthcare and equity and a whole lot of other things, and you know, there are an awful lot of us who are prepared to say we're not going to take that.
But are we
into this
prepared to?
area to study in part because of self-interest? We saw ahead 10 or 12 years ago, and we wanted the places to be better in case we had to get into one of them.
Well, I was going to say, are we prepared to admit that we too are going to be old and frail?
Yes, I think so. I mean, we've been working with a group that fell apart actually during COVID that was working towards a congregate structure of our own to live together, more closely together, and to be able to help each other more closely. Ironically, COVID did the reverse, made us all appreciate our own houses and our backyards, but maybe we'll come back to that soon as well.
Well, I do want to remind people, please be prepared to put in, well, you can start putting your questions in now on the Q&A function, and we will start taking those questions in a few minutes. Can I end this section simply by asking you how much of any reform, I mean, perhaps it's self-evident, is dependent upon political will?
Oh, I think it's all, there has a lot to do with political will, especially when it comes to developing some kind of national standard. That the provinces, especially given who is in charge in many of those provinces, are not going to say, oh yes, federal government, set up some national standards like you did for medical and nursing care, apply it to long-term care, and yes, we'll take the money under those conditions, unless there is political will at the national level to say, these are the standards, you want the money, you commit to these standards.
Well, I was going to ask you about that because healthcare is a provincial responsibility. So what is the role of the federal government in all of this?
I think it's similar to what the federal role is in terms of Medicare, which is hospital and physician care. They have the money. And the Canada Health Act is really an imposition on the federal government. It tells the federal government, you can give money to the provinces, but only if you are satisfied that the provinces have met these 5 basic principles. They can be quite broadly couched. We don't want to get the federal government involved in trying to micromanage, but we do need a system whereby the federal government, which is much richer than any province, doles out money on the basis of some shared principles, broadly couched, but nonetheless real and enforceable. So that itself will require our putting a lot of political pressure on federal MPs.
And provincial territorial ones.
Yeah, but especially at the immediate thing is to get the federal government to act on the commitment in its most recent throne speech to actually move forward on the development of national standards.
Because the provinces are always requesting more in transfer payments, but what you're saying is it's more than only that.
Right.
Okay, we've got some questions coming in. Let me turn to some of them. Somebody is asking here, Art and Yvonne Seymour, aging in place is something frequently discussed within the health system. It seems seniors will have to take more action themselves to see results in that regard. What do you think of, and I've heard these 2 programs mentioned recently quite a bit, OASIS and NORCS, those naturally occurring research retirement communities. Is there hope in that? Those sorts of things?
Well, I think that there's hope in a lot of different options. One of my favorite places we visited in this big research project was in Norway, where the nursing home was physically built into a building that included the town Olympic-sized pool, a town cinema, a cafeteria, a spa, a daycare center. And so it mixed generations. I think that there are certainly people who would like to live in naturally occurring seniors collections. I think there are other people who, as one of your slides showed at the beginning, who want to see younger people around, have not just daycares, but generations in between. So I think that there are a lot of different options out there. One of the reasons we called our project Promising Practices is that we don't think that there's a single right way. And a lot depends on what your culture and your religion and your history in terms of which kinds of opportunities would work for you. I think, to go back to what you were saying about the boomers, we need to let many flowers bloom.
Right. Again, there are more questions that relate to alternate aging in place, things of this nature. Irene Kavanagh asked, have you looked at what they're doing in the Netherlands, where there's much made of the dementia villages and things like that? Is that again something useful to consider?
All of these promises in the study we did for the city of Toronto, we looked at various models. It didn't include the dementia villages, actually, that have now apparently become in such demand as research projects, they've had to really limit the number of people who go to see them. But many of the models like Eden and Greenhouse have a notion of congregating people who have similar kinds of needs. And that's certainly one way to go. And a dementia village is a way to go, right? I mean, the notion is you put together people who have dementia, but you give them more physical freedom. It's a bigger village to wander around in, as opposed to one room and one floor. But you can do that in a bigger building. You could do it with various architectural designs. The problem with a dementia village is it takes a lot of space.
Right. Now, the Danes, my friends, the Danes again, they have a prohibition against locked doors. If that's considered a violation of civil rights, basically.
So does Norway and Sweden.
Right.
The place we were in Germany had no locked doors. Most of the residents had some degree of dementia. They had enough staff so that on the rare occasion when somebody chose to wander outside the facility, a staff member would discreetly follow and encourage them to come back home.
We've actually been in a home in BC where the residents could lock their own doors. They had a key that they kept around their neck. The staff has a key to your room so that in case they have to get in or whatever, but you could lock your own door. So they had to knock to come in, and it was your own space.
That same principle was evident in Denmark again, because your room is considered your home, and as such you have the right to admit or not whoever you like. The Danes also used trompe d'oeil on walls so that it was difficult to find the door. And it didn't offend anybody. And they used iPhones a great deal and tracking devices if people did wander.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a difficult balance.
Well, in some places we've been in, the door to the room looks like a door to your house. Rather than be an institutional looking door, it's the wood with, attractive wood.
Maybe a mail slot.
Oh, how nice. Yeah. Someone has made the point here, and I just will have to scroll up the screen for a minute, that there is a long-term care home, I don't know if it's planned or it's being built in Mississauga in an industrial park. There are no people to watch. That will have 600 residents in 2 wings on 6 floors, and a dining room that holds 42 residents. Meals will be brought in, etc. Knowing all that we know, how could such a facility be built?
I have no answer. It's just even the food being brought in. One person, one politician, when we were talking about the contracting out of food services and how a whole plate full of food comes in front of you, that often turns older people off because they're just overwhelmed, or it has peas on that, really they can't stand, or it is a trigger for them or whatever. But this politician said to me, well, it's just like airline food. And I thought, yeah, it's just like airline food. I mean,
that was the problem.
That was the problem.
Yeah.
But it's that kind of thinking, I think, that is going into the construction of this kind of place. And I don't know how we get the understanding that this isn't a hospital, even though it has to provide clinical care, that it is a place where people live, and that's totally different from a hospital.
So the 6th floor, 600 resident place may be efficient, but efficient for whom? Well, not for the 600.
I mean, you could design a 600 place like a, one of these seniors villages. You know, it could be beautiful. It could have spas and swimming pools and dining rooms. I mean, it
Public
depends.
transit for everyone.
600 doesn't necessarily mean it's awful. It depends on how it's configured.
You also distinguished and made a point of this throughout the report. You pointed out the differences between the medical model and the social model, and that what has been relied on in determining care has been the medical model. What's wrong with that?
Well, just look at what's happened during COVID. Hospitals get priority, and nursing homes get the leftovers.
But within the home, in terms of emphasizing medical care, of course, people need to have medical care. But if that's your priority in terms of time, then you give the needle and you leave. Whereas
that's all you've got time to do.
That's all you've got time to do. And what may be at least as important for that person is for you to sit down and have a chat. As we've really come to recognize more during COVID. We talk about, when we talk about clothes and laundry, we also talk about how when many people come into a home, they need some assistance with dressing. But if the staff doesn't have very much time, it's way faster for them to just dress you rather than help you dress yourself. And if they're helping you dress yourself, then they can talk to you. You can have a conversation. You can spend some time. They can take into account that you won't wear blue socks. You know, that it becomes a very different kind of care, that social care. So it's not just social in the sense of playing bingo. It's social in the sense of actually trying to create some kind of relationship. You know, hospital stays now are incredibly short. The nurses we interviewed for another study we did for the Ontario Nurses Association was talking about how satisfying they found working in a long-term care home, because you got to know people, you got to know their families, you got to know their life stories, you developed a relationship with them, and that was rewarding for the staff as well as for the residents and the families.
So the medical model has a focus on body parts, specific body parts, and treating them. Well, people in long-term care have chronic conditions. They're not usually treatable, but they might be a little bit amenable to interventions. And I'll give you one example that the folks in the dementia community, the Alzheimer's Society, look at: the use of music. One of the things that is done in the best homes is that there is a lot of music, especially music where the individual resident has a control over the playlist, and music where the residents together can sing or hum or play an instrument even. And these turn out in a neurological way to be good for the brain, but they're also very good in social terms. So the distinction between the medical and the social can be bridged in some ways. And meanwhile, we should be paying much more attention to the social. This is not to say we should cut away the medical. You know, if you fall and break your arm, you want medical attention. But we need to put more emphasis on care as a relationship among people.
There's a difficult question that's been raised by Paul Caldwell, who is a doctor in our area. How much do you think long-term care will change if advanced decision-making for MAID is ever permitted?
I don't have any idea. It's just so hard to tell. Certainly that well, let me say the reverse. It's not an option if you don't have it, because according to the Long-Term Care Commission, now 80% have a form of dementia, so wouldn't be eligible of
No.
the residents that are there.
I
Wouldn't be
think-
eligible for
I
me.
think this question presumes that we might reach a point where advance directives are allowed. I mean, clearly what's implicit in this is that going into long-term care suggests that I'd rather be dead.
Yeah, well, and it's interesting how many residents we've talked to who really resisted going into long-term care and ended up being quite happy there. On the other hand, of course, we've also met people for whom that's not the case. And the Long-Term Care Commission makes it very clear that we are not very good at palliative care in long-term care. If we're recognizing that most people go there and the only way they leave is after they die, but that we need to figure out how we can make that a much more comfortable process, and that if it includes MAID, I know that from the people we've interviewed, it's not very common in long-term care right now partly I think for the reasons I just said, but palliative care isn't either.
Yeah. Someone asks, and probably you can't, can you name the positive homes and what makes them positive? I mean, let's just add in there, are you seeing more that are moving in the right direction?
Well, I think some of the more newly designed places are really taking into account not just the need for a private room, because I would argue that designing places for people to live is much, much bigger than giving them their own room and bathroom. And it's much bigger than simply having infection control procedures in place, although of course you want to have infection procedures in place. It's about creating living spaces, but creating those living spaces has to include variety. We had big debates in our research team. And when I said we take a group of 12 into a home, most of these people would be senior academics. Unlike many research projects where you send the students out to do the research, we did the research ourselves, and we had big debates about what does a home look like. Some of us really loved the Scandinavian hardwood floors and bright colors, and some of us really liked the old sofas and older furniture, and we had, and probably reflecting what our own homes were. Some of us hated carpets, and some of us thought, oh wow, it's better for sound. It looks more home-like. It looks so. Do we need one solution? No, I think we need many different ones. There is a new home in north of Etobicoke. What's it called? I've got Kensington Gardens in my head. It's not Kensington Gardens. Anyway, it's a city home that is really got a quite interesting design, and it has a really interesting family council. And one of the things they said was that they have a huge enclosed courtyard, and they were thinking of showing drive-in movies. You drive in your wheelchair and watch a movie. And they were thinking of bringing in a grade 7 class, that the classes, regular grade 7 classes would be held in the place. So part of it was the new physical space that allowed them to dream differently, but also it was a family council that was dreaming.
So there were people with a stake, an emotional stake in the place, who were engaged in the planning, not only those who might profit by it.
Right.
Yeah. We're fast coming to the end. I want to ask you one question before I turn things over to the chairman of the NLC board. Where are you going to go? What are you going to do?
Well, I don't know. And it's one of the things we talk about. And it's one of the, of course, we were trying to organize an alternative, as I said before, amongst our friends.
Right.
But there are also a number of places in Toronto that I would not be unhappy to live in.
So there are some good places out there,
Absolutely.
particularly if you've got money.
No. We
Okay,
only
sorry.
studied homes that are publicly funded in Canada. Now, some of them are for profit, as you said earlier, but they're publicly funded. And one of the studies done for a project by an economist named Martha McDonald showed that basically money doesn't keep you out of long-term care in Canada. It's the lack of space.
Right, yeah. There's lots more we could talk about. We've got to go. We're right at the end of our time. Thank you both a great deal. And I'm going to ask people, and I'm sure it will happen, if they can post the links to those booklets, which are all available online. They can post, we will post the links to those booklets on the NLC website, so people can read further.
For free.
For free. Hugh and Pat Armstrong, thank you so much for.
Thank you.
And can we have the slides at the beginning?
Thank you.
Thank
And
you.
I'd like to turn it over now to Elizabeth Ivory, the chair of the board of NLC, to give you an idea of what's coming up next. Betty.
Hi, thank you, Karen, and many thanks to Pat and you for educating us on the encouraging possibilities for successful long-term care. We will get those links to the booklets put on our website, and yes, Pat and you, we will get the slides to you. Our next presentation will be on June 10th, when Erwin Kotler will discuss the politics of human rights. Then we'll take a break for the summer, returning in the fall with 2 more terrific Zoom speakers. Roger Martin, one of the world's top business strategists, will discuss limits to growth. And then we'll welcome Terry O'Reilly, advertising guru and creator of CBC's Under the Infinite. So before you leave, please take a few minutes to complete the survey that will appear on your screen when I sign off. We really value your feedback. Until June 10th, thanks and good night.